Welcome everybody, and I know more folks are going to be trickling in as a part of it. Today, presentation, School in Unprecedented Times, Navigating Behavioral Health Concerns with Children and Adolescents. We're going to be talking a lot about children and anxious feelings, adolescents, children and angry feelings, things that come up as part of all the struggles within transitions back to in-person learning, quarantining, not quarantining, all those different things. So both Lauren and I are going to be talking a lot about some of the things that we're observing, different kinds of experiences that we've been noticing from different families, and talking about some potential parenting strategies and resources as a part of it. We'll also be fielding some questions by the end of this, all right? So all told, we'll probably be about 40 to 45 minutes of presentation and then 15 to 20 minutes of answering questions as a part of it. So, and feel free to type them in the chat feature and we will address them at the end. So first up, there's myself, Patrick Golier. I work out of the Arbor Park location and the West Arbor location. I've been with IHA for approximately a year at this point. Prior to this, I spent about 10 years working at Ozone House, a youth crisis center and emergency shelter based out of formerly Ann Arbor, now in Ypsi. And before that, worked within a lot of after-school pregnancy prevention programming and adolescent counseling programs in Detroit.
My name is Lauren Cox. I am one of our behavioral health therapists with IHA. I am currently located in West Arbor and our Chelsea locations. I've been with IHA for approximately just close to 6 months. Previously, before that, I've experienced working with different populations, whether that was in the justice system, at-home services, also one-on-one individual therapy, and I'm happy to meet with you guys too. So as Patrick mentioned, we're going to be touching on a few different topics today. So from our experience as behavioral health therapists, we will be discussing an overview of returning to school and associated with anxiety, different anger, behavioral challenges, also discussing the influence and impact of social media. And then towards the end, we'll be sharing different parenting strategies as well to help you and your families at home. In addition, we will be providing different resources and exploring different treatment options. And if, again, I know we've mentioned a few times, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat and we will make sure to address them towards the end. So first, we're going to be starting off looking into returning school and anxiety. And we think it's really beneficial to touch base on the real life examples that we're experiencing as therapists, whether that's in a session, consulting with families, providing resources. So a few of the different situations that have come up in our experience is comments like his teacher says he refuses to talk in class. Similar with, she used to be my social butterfly, not so much anymore. They would rather fail than ask the teacher a question. He doesn't answer me when I ask how school was today. She freaks out while she's waiting for the bus stop. So some different concerns coming from parents and saying, well, what do I do with this? I'm not sure what's going on. So tonight we're going to look at what anxiety looks like and in a few different situations, and also how do we manage that. So to start off, as long as it may have taken kids to adjust to virtual or hybrid learning in the past year and a half, we're currently seeing that there are barriers adjusting to their current school structure. While some kids might be thrilled to be back in school, there's other children that are having difficulty with the change. So it's important to keep in our minds that children had different flexibility. So they could sit wherever they want for school at home. They can get up and grab a snack whenever they'd like, even just getting up and saying, not asking for permission to go to the bathroom. So our in-person school has learning has different expectations, different boundaries that may look different than what kids had at home previously. We are keeping in mind that we are still managing a pandemic, so quarantine is possible. Thinking about some schools don't currently offer virtual learning if someone is quarantined. This is resulting in worrying thoughts about their grades, looking at increase in stress. How do I go from being in person and glad that I'm back in versus now I'm quarantined for 10 days and I get used to that routine, then back to school. So it's a lot of changes and it's difficult to be able to manage that, whether it's adult, child, teen, it's just difficult to kind of comprehend it all at very quickly. Also looking at what routine has been looking like for kids. So we are beings of habit, comparing our routines of last year to this year. There's significant changes. Some kids have shared that they would wake up, log on to school, turn off their camera, and lay back in bed. Or even just being back in school forces us to wake up on time, get ready for school, leave at the right time, and then spending 7 or 8 hours out of the home. So just looking at way different expectations of our routine, what that looks like, and how that then manifests into some anxiety. A few different ways that we're seeing that is difficulty with concentration. So some kids might say, I hear my teacher talking, but I have so many thoughts in my head, they're too loud. I can't really pay attention. Feeling overstimulated. I'm sitting at my desk with 20 or 30 students sitting around me. That's a lot of movement going on. The lights are brighter in my classroom versus in my bedroom. Also, there's so much noise at school, whether that's students, whether that's presentations, whether that's in the hallways. So even just looking at all of those changes that we're not used to versus when we were at home. We are also seeing manifested in time management. So having responsibilities for school, extracurricular activities, even our home life gets really busy. Kids are having a hard time managing so many expectations. And sometimes we see that it's either being avoided, they're stressed out trying to handle it all, and feeling like, I just don't know what to do. Another way we're seeing it is looking at their comfort zone. So we all have our safe place that makes us most comfortable. Sometimes that place is not school. Whether that's being in a public restroom with other people. We didn't have that at home. Looking at sitting at a table to work on a science project rather than being in bed or at my own dining table. Feeling uncomfortable eating in a lunchroom when I was able to eat in the privacy of my home. There's a lot of changes, and that comfort zone has now felt like it's taken away majority of the time during our day now that we're back in person. So next we're going to look at just socialization and anxiety, and school is social, right? So we are seeing symptoms present in different manners. So looking at emotional symptoms, kids are experiencing worrying thoughts, fear of something happening, even at school or once we're out of school, replaying different interactions. Did I say this? Was this embarrassing? I shouldn't have even walked up and talked with someone. And then that fear of embarrassment. What happens? What if, right? So those are a lot of racing thoughts that they're having, and not necessarily communicating with friends or with parents. They're just thinking about it a lot. Looking at physical symptoms. So we're experiencing these worrying thoughts. We're replaying different interactions. Now our body is responding to it. So we might see, or we've seen a few individuals talking about, my stomach hurts all the time. Not just that I have butterflies, it feels like I'm going to get sick. Maybe my head is throbbing. I feel like I just can't think. We're having sweating, right? My hands are really clammy. The back of my neck gets sweaty. Tension. My body is so tight. Sometimes we notice, like, all of a sudden someone says, you look really upset. You look really mad. And they're like, what? And they realize their forehead has been just so much tension in there as well. And looking at shakiness. When people are talking to someone gets called on in class, all of a sudden their hands are shaking, their legs are vibrating, not sure how to control that, but in that moment they're like, I can feel this throughout my physical body. Then looking at avoidance. So whether that is an event, whether that's an activity, maybe they really love going to football games, but that anxiety stops them from wanting to go, or that they make those plans and then they're saying, I got to cancel. I can't make it. Mom said no, right? So we're even seeing some of those avoiding behaviors, even in things that they may want to do, or I know I have a big test coming up, but I'm feeling nervous. I think I'm going to fail it. Now I'm avoiding studying because it feels like all too much. Some of the situations that we're seeing these symptoms in our sessions is presenting in class. So when I get called on, all of a sudden I freeze. I don't know the answer, even though I just read that question and I knew, yep, I know that. I don't know how to respond. Interactions with peers. Lauren used to be my best friend. I don't really talk to her at school anymore. I don't know how to engage with her. I don't feel connected with her. Lunchtime has been a big one people have shared about. A lot of schools have assigned seating at lunchtime, and maybe it's someone I'm uncomfortable. Maybe I don't feel as confident sitting next to someone specific, whether that's just to talk to or actually sit down and eat my meal in front of. And also riding the bus has been very popular lately. So I don't know who I'm supposed to sit next to. I feel like everyone is staring at me while I walk down the aisle. People are talking about anything and everything, and there's very limited supervision. So a lot of different situations that we see that we are seeing students feel like, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to talk. I don't know how I'm going to get throughout this next day. So next we're going to look at managing anxiety. So when we think of managing anxiety, there's so many different ways to be able to say, okay, maybe I can't control it. Maybe I can. What can I do about this situation? What can I do in this moment? So when we think about different managing techniques, we want to think about validating the feeling. Not necessarily asking, why are you nervous about that? We don't always intend for it to come out negative, but in that moment, it feels like it's shutting down what that your kid's experiencing. So validating that feeling. I can see you're really nervous about that test tomorrow. Promoting calmness. If my kid's worked up and I'm responding with that same energy, it feels like it's just building on top of each other. Take a minute to yourself. Say, okay, what can I do in this moment to be able to relax? And then say, how can I help you relax? Looking at different self-soothing techniques, whether that's taking deep breaths, counting with it. A big one that we talk about here is box or square breathing. So breathing in for 4 seconds and counting, holding it for 4, exhaling for 4, and then holding it for 4 again. Practicing and focusing on our breathing, counting, and that visualization of a square. Also, identifying safety. In that moment, our thoughts are everywhere. My body's responding, figuring out ways to say, how am I physically safe, and then also emotionally safe? Who do I feel comfortable to talk around? Or who do I feel most comfortable to be myself? In addition to validating the feeling, also positive affirmation. Hey, I know you were really nervous about that test, but you did your best. I'm proud of you. We always want to think that we give that validation, but sometimes it gets busy. We don't always have that thought to say, hey, this is something that you did really well, or I know you worked really hard on that. So keeping that in our mind to say, to acknowledge that and affirm it. Thinking about reasonable expectations. So we all want our children to do their very best, but what may have been their normal before may look different now. So we've heard parents say they've always gotten A's, and all of a sudden this year, it's not like that. So even just identifying that there can be a difference in what our expectations are, communicating, I want you to try your best. Not necessarily, I expect you to get 100% all of the time. That then creates worrying thoughts. Children are starting to place like, I'm not good enough, I'm not working hard enough, even though they are putting in all of this different work. Next, we want to think about response versus emotional reaction. So take a minute to collect your thoughts. Think we all get frustrated. If I'm frustrated, you're not doing your homework, you're not studying, and we're asking over and over and over again, we get frustrated as adults, as parents. And so even just taking a minute saying, okay, how can I respond to what my child is either telling me, showing me, because that's more beneficial than reacting negatively to them. Next, managing technique would be connecting with support. So feeling like I am not alone in this, whether that's a family member, whether that's a teammate, a friend, anything that we identify as feeling like we're receiving support from is a great way to either talk with them, spend time with them, make sure that we have that connection and we know how to get in contact with people. And then lastly, thinking about our sleep routine. We need our sleep, and thinking about our routine changing, our expectations changing with being back in school, making sure we're going to bed at the right time to give me enough time to get well rest. thinking about I now have to start waking up 30 minutes, an hour before normal to catch the bus, get ready for school. That impacts our sleep, and that definitely impacts how we experience and manage anxiety. This has been a big topic in the last couple months, and it is having a panic attack every day. So we're hearing an increase in individuals experiencing panic attacks. They are very scary for not only your child, but you as well. A panic attack is going to be that sudden onset of, a sudden onset of feeling like there is no end to this, an intense either fear or excessive worrying about some perceived threat, whether that's physical or that's psychological. Am I thinking that's going to happen, or is there something in the physical world that's showing me that it's going to present? Panic attacks may also include heart palpitations, so my heart is throbbing. I can feel it beating out of my chest. Shortness of breath. I just can't catch a good gasp of air, and then trembling. Again, kind of that shakiness, feeling like I can't stand up, feeling I don't even think I can walk to somewhere else. So when we think about panic attacks, we also want to talk about some different ways we can manage that. Time is going to be our ultimate solution with panic attacks, but what we do in that time is really important. So a few helpful ways is to think about these three blocks. And first, we're going to find a way to relax. Either we're sitting down, if we're able, lay down. If we can't do either one of those, depending on the environment, how do I just find a place to stay still? Taking some deep breaths. So practicing with someone, ask them, all right, let's make eye contact. Let's take a deep breath with me. Use our hand to show them when we breathe in, when we breathe out. Muscle tension. So tightening our muscles and then relaxing them. Grabbing our hands really tight and gripping, relaxing them. So that's then telling our mind that I've tightened, but I've also relaxed, and my mind can relax as well. Thinking about what do we focus on? Find any object, whether it's a water bottle, whether it's a phone, force ourselves to focus on that and think about the details. Read the numbers out loud on a phone. Describe the water bottle, what that looks like. Trying to get our mind to focus on something that is calm and it isn't going to continue to stimulate that panic. Thinking about visualizing, picturing somewhere that I feel most comfortable. Maybe that's me laying in my bed. Maybe that's me laying in a hammock on a beach, right? Using our creative mind to picture ourselves in that situation versus where we're experiencing that panic attack. And then lastly, we want to think about our outlook. So reminding ourselves, this is going to pass. In that moment, it feels like it's never ending and I don't know what to do. I'm going to be stuck in this forever. Not true. What we can do is remind ourselves that it's going to pass over time. Having either positive or neutral, non-stressing topics, whether that's telling a joke, whether that's thinking about, hey, what are 3 things that made you smile today, right? Having a conversation, what are you going to eat for dinner, right? So getting the brain out of that cycle of racing thoughts and being able to say, okay, this is what I can do next. And lastly, we want to think about signs of safety. So again, not just physical, but psychological as well. Who am I safe around right now? Is it mom? Is it my teacher? Is it my friend? I also know that there is no physical threat around me. I am under a roof or it's sunny when I'm outside, identifying those ways of safety.
Excuse me. On the other side of everything, we've also seen behavior problems, anger, kind of an explosion of a lot of behavioral issues with young people returning back to classroom settings, returning back to school settings, being again and sharing space with their peers, sharing space with their bullies, sharing space with people that they enjoy, sharing space with people that they don't enjoy. So we'll talk through a lot of the different things that we've been seeing and noticing in some of our conversations with families and young people, some of those potential strategies as a part of it, and different ways of conceptualizing when these behavior problems are coming up, what kinds of things we can do. And as a heads up, I have 2 dogs that may bark, and I tend to talk really fast. So if I am talking too fast for somebody, feel free to raise a hand and I will slow my pace down. So the return has been extremely rough for many families and a very rough transition. like Lauren was referencing, people got very accustomed to certain settings, that being at home in ways, even if virtual learning is very difficult, had some comforts as a part of it. People got very used to adult supervision as a part of it very often. They got used to being able to be in their beds, not having to have a morning routine as a part of it. So transitioning to all of this has been a very difficult thing. We're hearing a lot more about kicking, a lot more about biting, leaving classrooms, refusing directives, sometimes in direct confrontation with teachers, and refusing to comply with the kinds of things that they're asking for. Many children seem completely overstimulated in classroom settings, and some of those frustrations spill over into family settings. We know that if somebody has had an extremely stressful day at school, that's going to fill up that bucket, and when they're getting ready to head home, and then maybe they're coming home with a note from the teacher of a thing that didn't go well, or some comment in Power School, or an email from somebody about things that didn't go well, that's setting the stage for conflict at home just directly. And we know right now, there are parent-teacher conferences are happening for a lot of folks. A lot of parents are getting news that they're not particularly enjoyed to hear. And this has been a topic that we're talking about increasingly with a lot of different people. The kinds of comments that we're hearing, that I know I've been hearing, he is totally out of control. Parents saying, I'm going to cry if the principal calls me to pick her up again. A huge stress I've been talking with a lot of families about is being asked to come to the school repeatedly and pick up their child. He's completely defiant. I'm worried I raised a bully. Parents surprised by the cruelty their children might have towards other people. The school is threatening to kick her out. Just thinking this week, I've talked with the family about a 6-year-old that, they dropped their young person off at school. Child went in, didn't like what the person in the cubby next to them was doing. They immediately pushed that other child and started to fight within the first 5 minutes of school beginning, and the parent was called in immediately to handle that situation. Talked with another family about a 5-year-old that had a stressful experience at recess, walked inside, didn't like what the teacher said, flipped the table and pushed a kid out of his chair, and the family was immediately had to be involved, and there was a fight against a principal, became a massive thing that involved a lot of interventions with social workers there. Or talk with a family about their 15-year-old at home. What they see is that their 15-year-old plays video games all day and is screaming, pounding on the desk, throwing video game controllers. They hear that at school they're skipping classes, that they're generally true in a lot of settings, and that they worry about fights. There are a lot of things that families observing are seeing that are causing them a lot of concern. Next. So when I'm talking with a lot of families about it, I think there's an initial push, like there's a behavior that's wrong, that behavior needs to be fixed. And yes, that is true, that if a child is hitting another child, or is pushing another child, or is totally disrupting a classroom situation, or a teenager is saying extremely mean or cruel things, or getting into fights regularly, those are problems, and that is something that needs to stop. But a way that I talk with families about, at least as far as reframing, is the idea of behavior as the language of unmet needs. That if a young person is doing something that is problematic, that is causing trouble, that is disrupting things in a family, yes, that is an issue, but that's communicating something about what that person needs. In my experience prior to this at Ozone House Crisis Center, it has a minor shelter for young people that cannot safely stay at home, and transitional living programs for young adults that were kicked out of their families, emergency counseling, crisis counseling services. Nobody is coming to us on their best day in that setting. Generally, we're seeing families that are at a moment of breaking, that there are behaviors at home that are so dangerous that people cannot safely be together, that there are threats of violence, there are threats of abuse, a lot of scary things that can come as a part of it. So certainly, while we're in the shelter and providing those counseling and intervention services, we see a lot of those things, that there are young people that around meal times would have an explosion, to be throwing things around and generally disrupting everything that's happening there. Young people cussing us out as a part of it, talking with us about things that they hate about what we're doing and all these things that are happening, running away from the shelter as a part of it. And the way that we would frame that is, okay, we know that this is a problem. What is this behavior trying to communicate? If your child is having a tantrum every single day before going to school, yes, that is an issue and it disrupts the family. But what is that telling you about what that child thinks of their school experience? If your child is going in and fighting against all the other kids, and then when they come home, they say to you, like, nobody likes me, nobody wants to spend time with me. What is that communicating about what they think other people think of them? If they're talking about that they just want to fight against the teacher all the time, and then they say, well, my teacher hates me. What does that say about like their worries about what adults think about them in their lives? And that doesn't immediately solve a scenario, but neither does, telling your child you can't do that. There's a core worry, or there's a core concern that needs to be addressed as a part of it. Children lack that vocabulary to vocalize those needs. That it would be very nuanced for a 5, 6, 7-year-old to be able to tell you, well, I feel like other kids don't really like me, they don't want to play with me, so sometimes it's hard for me to control my hands when that thing's happening. It would be a very emotionally intelligent 5, 6, 7-year-old to be able to say that. They just express those through their actions. So it might be very helpful as parents, as people caring for teenagers, as caring for children, to think about, okay, so we know what is wrong about this, or the way that we might approach this is that there's something wrong about this. Think about, what are they trying to communicate through this? What is this behavior telling me about what this child needs? And we'll also reiterate as a part of it, Lauren and I talk with a lot of families about issues in school and behavior problems that explode out as a part of it. We become a small part of someone's life. We are an hour every week, every other week, to talk about different things. We are often turning to and talking about, what is the school available to provide as resources in those situations. With teenagers, there's a more developed brain, more ability to process these things and talk about struggles that are happening. With younger children, there really need to be immediate interventions in place to be able to connect sort of a behavior with a consequence and with a change in behavior. So if we're talking about issues in behavior in schools, we're talking about impacts of isolation, impacts of a quarantine on development. As adults, we had a year and a half that was completely disrupted for us, that changed our lives, changed our work lives, changed our social lives. But we also lived an entire life before that. And there is, it certainly is a difficult transition to be able to come back to, at least as things are opening up and things are changing within the pandemic. There are reference points that we have to what life was like before and what things were like before. If we're talking about a 6-year-old, that's 2 years of their life that has been extremely disrupted and extremely different, that they experience school not as a thing that they are being asked to experience now. And this is very new. And that's not a surprise to anyone here, I imagine. But if somebody is having, a lot of behavioral issues, being around a lot of...
Patrick, I think we lost you. We'll give Patrick just a minute to see if his connection can reconnect. So let's just give him a moment here. And if not, we'll have Lauren take over from his slide. Lauren, while we're waiting, we had a question. Someone was asking if you could reiterate what the signs of safety are. Could you answer that question while we're waiting for Patrick?
Yes, of course. So as individuals, we know what safety is, right? So like no dangers, no things like that. But when we think about anxiety, sometimes it's a physical threat that we feel like, oh, this feels like it's going to be dangerous, right? We also have either psychological or emotional concerns as well. So when we think about identifying signs of safety, that's not necessarily saying, yep, I have a roof over my house, my head, I have food today, I have clothing, I have somewhere to sleep. Right? It's also, who do I feel comfortable being myself around? How do I figure out what makes me feel comfortable? So that looks different for everyone. But even just identifying what safety means for a child, even for a parent, right? So sometimes it's helpful parents say, I feel I feel comfortable when you and I talk together, right? So even identifying your way of safety for your child as well. So looking at, how am I physically safe in that moment? I know we talked about it, whether it was managing anxiety or specifically managing a panic attack. But if I'm looking around in my office right now and I say, okay, I can hear that it's raining, but I know I have windows and I can shut my blinds if that makes it worse. I also know that I have someone else in the office with me that if I was having any issues, I could talk to. So how do we feel comfortable in that moment, whether that's something physical or also emotional as well?
So sorry, I'm back.
Yeah. Welcome back.
Apologies. I had an internet crash. Okay.
I was just answering one of the questions. So if we want to start back on impacts of isolation.
Nice. All right. I'm back there. Unpausing there. What children expected of teachers and adults changed. Children were accustomed to some supervision while they were at home, potentially, depending on the circumstances. They were accustomed to be able to take breaks when they wanted to, that they could walk away from a camera, they could turn the camera off, they could be in a different space as a part of it, they could adjust their settings. They got very used to being able to, I don't know I feel like if any parents here are parents of high schoolers, folks got very used to being able to turn in work very late, basically towards the end of the semester. That has all changed. And then with that change comes stress. With that stress can come behavioral disturbances as a part of it. All right, back on track. We're talking about some different approaches before we dive into talking about a lot of different parental strategies folks could use. If we're talking about anger, there are a few things that we would suggest to folks as very basic suggestions. That the most difficult time to talk about anger is when we're angry. Same for children. If the time that you decide to confront a problematic behavior, or to talk about an issue that happened at school, or to talk about a violent thing that happened, or hitting or inappropriate thing, that the most stressful time to do it for everybody is right when it is happening. The appropriate thing to do in those moments is to assert a limit, explain exactly what needs to happen in that moment, allow that child to take a break, cool down, allow yourself a moment to take a break and cool down after that has been asserted, and then return to that conversation when heart rates are down, when bodies are feeling more relaxed and folks are ready to have that kind of conversation. Trying to have it when folks are angry. I think folks know this. When you respond to anger with anger, that doesn't make anger go away. It just keeps anger going. Planning in anticipation of issues. If you know that, like I was mentioning, a tantrum every single day before you go to school, if you know that that's a thing that happens, there are things that you can put in place to get ready for that, independent of just sort of trying to get your kid into school and force them through the door. That, okay, so what does that morning look like? Are folks rushing to get everything together? Are people still hungry because they didn't have breakfast? Was there a shouting match over homework and getting everything together and then going to school? If that's the case, that is probably set the stage for that kid to have a very low amount of distress tolerance for something that may already be a very stressful experience for them. This is not a surprise to anybody here, setting very clear expectations and consistently implementing consequences. Children thrive in predictability and they thrive in structure. If those things are, also available to them at home, that at least enhances the chance for success. That if they know that, okay, so if I accomplish these things, there might be, some comforting thing that happens as a part of it or some benefit. Or if I know I hit my brother, these are consequences as a part of it. If I know I come home to school and, I've had so many notes or so many marks for things that didn't go well while I was at school or violent things that happened. If they can predict those things, if a child can predict what's going to happen, they can make different choices potentially as a part of it. And then perfection versus improvement. Lauren and I talk with families a lot about this idea. I think, I'll talk with today, talking with a family about, tantrums at school, young person having an outburst, throwing books, talking with a parent that they were very disappointed that this happened again, that, this past Tuesday, reached into the teacher's library and started whipping different books at other students. Talking with the parent, what initially brought us together is they were having multiple outbursts every single day and having to be picked up by the principal. And that was happening pretty much throughout the entire month of September. Now we've been over a 2-week period where they had one tantrum and one outburst as a part of it. And that is unfortunate and that's frustrating, but that is improvement. That is change. That is a vast amount of improvement as a part of it. Expecting perfection out of a child when all of us are imperfect raises the stakes and sets that young person up for failure and disappointment. And then some families find a lot of usefulness and help in thinking of anger as a tunnel and not a freeway. That if a young person is having a very large outburst or is having a very frustrating moment or is, having a very difficult time completing homework, and it becomes a tantrum as a part of it, and there's an outburst and there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of shouting, stomping, punching things, throwing things. That's like they don't come built in with off ramps. That young person needs to get through to the end of that feeling. That they need to get through all the different stages and steps of being frustrated, being angry, and that it's okay to do those things. There are things that are not okay to do while you're angry, but they need to come out on the other end of it. And that's the family working to figure out, okay, so what kind of setting do we need to put this person in where they can express that emotion and get it out, where they can do things that are safely angry, and then get to the end of it before we come to it. Because attempting to interrupt it, I imagine a lot of folks experience, just leads to more frustration. Next one. All right. And then we've been talking with a lot of different folks about impacts of social media, not only in a few different ways. Like we're talking about it both as now a lot of folks are describing it as very disruptive in school settings, that it comes up a lot with, the ways that young people are communicating with each other and how that becomes issues. But then also Lauren and I will be talking about sort of, there are ways that this was set up during the pandemic, that there were ways that this was a support for young people and a connection for young people and for us during a very difficult time. So like some of the things that we might hear, things that we very often hear, she just won't put her phone down. The school keeps calling us about his phone use. They're accessing inappropriate sites and images. The only way they communicate is with, that's the only way that they communicate with others. I think this, end up talking with a lot of families that they worry about. He doesn't have any real life friends, that the only connections that they see for their young person to have is through whatever social media platform it seems to be. Young people that I know do not use Facebook. I'm talking to a lot of people about Instagram, a lot of people about Snapchat, a lot of people about Discord servers. And that's where a lot of young people have made and maintained their connections going into a school year that has been very difficult for them.
So next we're going to touch on how connection is important. So I think a few key pieces to this is that quarantine was lonely, right? Like we weren't at school, we didn't have our friends. Even as adults, we couldn't see our go on Monday night book club or whatever that looked like, right? So all of our socialization was taken away from us. And what did that lead to? So most of individuals, whether adults, children, or teens, maintained connection through our devices. So transitioning to different settings, whether that's school, whether that's sports, whether that's still just being at home, that doesn't accommodate our devices, doesn't necessarily dismiss the fact that we have that need to fill that connection. So a big thing, like Patrick was just talking about, they won't put their phone down. It's not allowed at school, right? And so our kids or teens have been conditioned like that's how I stay connected, but now we're taking away that opportunity to be able to utilize that. It's also important to continue to support connection while establishing those boundaries. So I'm not saying you can't talk to people on your phone, but if we're at dinner, we're not having phones at dinner, or at school, you can't have it in science class, like, can we put it away and then you can utilize it in passing time? Or your math class says it's fine to have it. Identifying those boundaries and then setting them as well, making sure there's those clear expectations surrounding it. We also wanted to touch base a little bit on social media and kind of the impacts that it has outside of school, but kind of still relates or impacts school as well. So social media can impact self-identity and image in positive and negative ways, right? So thinking about different topics that are talked about online. We've heard in different areas that there is a, deviance lick trend going on, right? And so that means like things are being done at school, and it implements things. So not necessarily the kids that we're not only having those conversations with the kids that are participating, but also those that have been affected by that. There's been different events that have been shut down because of this social media trend is now causing concerns or safety concerns in school events or football games, things like that, that then impact the anxiety or just connection of other individuals. Thinking of kind of just self-image as well. Do I look and feel the way I'm supposed to? So we are not saying social media is bad and not let your kids have that. It's very important. It's a great way to connect, but having those conversations, what does it mean to have a good support system, whether that's in person or online? Are people bullying you online and then it gets carried into school, or vice versa? Is it that I know posts on Instagram are huge, right? Or likes on TikTok, right? I didn't get enough likes on this post, so I'm going to delete it because I must not look the certain way I should, or I shouldn't be acting the way I should, right? So it definitely can become internalized of who I am and how I view myself. And then that is also supported at school or in vice versa ways as well. So next we want to think about we are all individuals, and at certain ages we hit developmental stages of saying we need privacy. We want to be our own person. I don't want to share everything with mom or dad or certain people. Sometimes that comes a little uncomfortable for a parent to hear, I need more privacy. But wanting and needing privacy is part of that developmental stage, especially with our preteens or teenagers saying, I need some space. Even younger ages, teaching what privacy looks like, but with those boundaries as well. There's a lot of different ways for teenagers to exercise their autonomy. What does that look like of having a cell phone or having social media, but knowing mom and dad has access to that if they're just to make sure things are safe, right? even thinking about it in a way of like acceptance versus control. So if we set those boundaries and we have those communication with our children, saying, I'm not trying to control you, I'm trying to make sure that things are safe. Having those conversations. What does that exactly look like to have a phone, to have an Instagram or a Twitter or whatever that looks like? Because especially with this developmental stage, if mom or dad or whoever guardian is trying to control exactly what I can do, they don't feel like they have their own control in their life either. So how do we meet that need of control in other ways? A big piece that we hear a lot is, you're not doing that because I said so. A lot of times with whether that's our phone or what we can have, so what social media we can access or when I can have my phone in my room. And I get it. You're the parent, you're living under my rules, right? That mindset is, I have that control. But when we think about the importance of establishing privacy, we don't want everyone in the world to know what's going on in your life, right? When we think about communicating it in a way of understanding, saying, this is why it's important to have privacy. This is important why I have access to check your emails or monitor the content or whatever that looks like for your home. Having that understanding so that, or having that conversation of understanding, so it's not just, I'm trying to control you. It's more of that understanding piece of what's expected of me and the reasoning behind it. A big piece is that kids or teens are going to have curiosity. And when we think about the understanding and those expectations, it's important to have those because it's likely that kids are going to find information that they're curious about one way or the other. And it's going to be either in the control or our expectations, or it's going to be out of it. So we're hearing that a kid had access at a friend's house, right? Or all of a sudden, I've had plenty of kids say, yeah, my mom has my Instagram account, but I have like a hidden one or things like that. And it feels like there's a lot of just conflict with that. So how do we have those understanding conversations of, this is why it's important, because once they turn 18, they can make whatever account they want, they can sign up for whatever they want, but there's still those important life lessons or life skills to learn about privacy, what is safe internet usage. So making sure we're having those conversations, because they can be uncomfortable, but in the long run, they are very beneficial to say, this is what's the expectation, but here's how you can understand and the reasoning behind it too. So next we are going to touch on some parent strategies. So we've mentioned some throughout all of our different slides, but kind of grouping those together, pulling them all together to say, what is it that you guys can do at home, right? So right now we've given a lot of background information, a lot of knowledge, but it's like, how do we apply that?
Expectations had to change. That we had to make a lot of adjustments around devices, around screen time, around play, around school, around work. That there were a lot of things that we were able to accommodate for while we were at home, and certainly we had to give a lot when it came to screen time. I think everyone wants to snap back now, but we had kids, but many children had unfettered access to their iPads, to their phones, to their screens, whatever it was, because it was an expectation that's how the things had to happen. So it's a difficult transition. Transitions always bring stress and frustration. It probably isn't helpful to hear, but there should be some expectation of stress and frustration when we are going to and changing these kinds of things. And I imagine there's an additional amount of that when there are periods of quarantine and there are periods of not quarantine, about worrying where people came in, about explosions, whatever it is. So approaches with anger. And on the right side, you'll see some suggestions just around materials that we have as a part of it. There's all kinds of things that are out there. I know when I'm talking with folks, I might turn very often to Love and Logic. There's a parenting book that's out there that discusses some different approaches to managing behaviors with children. A couple workbooks as suggestions there, but there are many. Some of the big things that we're always going to talk about are modeling. If your response to anger in your child is with anger, then that shows to that child how one handles anger. If the response to the child is to take a break from them and say, I'm going to remove myself from this situation. I'm not removing myself from you, but I'm going to come back when I'm calm. That models to that child what it means to approach anger when somebody is calm. Again, clear and consistent boundaries and consequences. Bring that up specifically. I talk with a lot of blended families with stepmothers, stepfathers in different settings in different places, and managing those expectations between homes can be very difficult. It is not the child's job to figure that out and to work that out. But as much as possible, parents have the responsibility to keep those things aligned if they are hoping for easier behavior management between households. That expectations should be related to developmental levels. Lauren and I both know that we may talk to a parent of a 4 or 5-year-old that may say, like, I'm very frustrated. My child has tantrums, a couple times a month. Yes, that is frustrating. Tantrums are not a fun thing to participate in and be a part of. That is expected for that developmental level, that there are going to be moments of overwhelmed emotions. If we are seeing it beyond that age or of an increasing amount, an amount that's many times a day, we may have different conversations about that, but tantrums are to be expected around that age. As my teenager spends a lot of time in their room and isolating. That is to be expected at this age, that there's times when they would prefer to isolate and times that they would want to be on their own. If it's something that is causing deep disruptions to the families or is a very surprising thing that people worry about mood or depression, it's a different conversation, but that's what we would expect out of teenagers. Setting expectations ahead of time and setting the stage, that if we know that there's a stressful event coming, like going to school, how do we prepare ourselves emotionally to be able to handle that stress when it comes to us? Like, how do we prepare in the morning? If there is, constantly, every family, I talk with families about knowing what their landmines are, that every family has conversations that typically turn into a fight, whether it's about chores or doing the dishes or completing homework or what are grades in school. If a family knows what that landmine is, you can set the stage ahead of time and see if folks handle it differently. It could be hey, son of mine, daughter of mine, child of mine, I would like to talk about chores in 10 minutes, not in an angry way or a frustrated way, but I'd just like to talk about it. We're going to do that in 10 minutes and get yourself ready. And like I mentioned before, meeting anger with anger does not eliminate anger. That an angry response to a child that is dealing with some very deep, frustrating emotions is a very natural thing to do, but that doesn't make anger go away. And then, of course, for any adult and for any parent, the permission to take breaks, that all of us deserve times to walk away from a situation that is very frustrating. We are not leaving our children or abandoning them. We are saying, I'm in a space emotionally where I'm going to respond with anger. I'm going to take a break right now and then come back when I'm ready to handle it. And that helps model for a child, okay, that it is okay for me to walk away when I'm experiencing an overwhelming emotion.
So next we're gonna recap again some different approaches with anxiety. So when we think about a worrying thought, right? So we're having a lot of worries. I'm not gonna do well. I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm gonna fail this class. We wanna really look at feeding a worry versus arguing with it. So when we hear our kids saying, I have this big test tomorrow and I'm gonna fail. I'm not going to be able to study. I'm not going to pass this class. I'm not going to college, right? This is a third grader thinking about years down the road based on one situation. So those thoughts are feeding that worry. On the flip side, we want to think about how do we argue with that, which sounds a little bit weird. I always kind of talk about let's argue with our brain. And instead saying, what are some positive interactions or experiences we've had with taking tests? How do we prepare for that? Is there truth to that? What's the fact? What's not fact? Thinking about what's the worst case situation, what's the best case, what's most realistic, right? So having those conversations to argue against the worry versus feeding that so it continues to grow. We want to think about working with your child, not against. So Patrick just talked a lot about it could be any conversation and we feel like we're just butting heads constantly. It could be, hey, how was school? And it's like, it's none of your business. And you're like, I was just asking how your day was, right? So thinking about how do we set ourselves up saying, I can see that you're worrying about this. I can see that you're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. How can I help you in this? Here are some ways that I'm here to be supportive. If you need some time, let me know. Let me know when you're ready to talk, right? So feeling like we're on the same team versus against each other. Just like with whether it's anger or behavioral challenges, setting the stage. How are we preparing for school? If I know my kid is having a panic attack or it's taking them so long to get out the door, even though I say, we got 10 minutes to get there, we gotta go, giving ourselves enough time. What are we gonna do in the morning to decrease that stress? There's times where I've made a evening routine versus a morning routine. Not necessarily about getting ready for bed, putting our pajamas on and brushing our teeth.
Yeah.
What can I prepare in the morning to decrease that stress, or what can I do in the evening to decrease that stress in the morning? I'm packing my backpack. I have my water bottle set. I've chose what clothes I'm wearing. So even figuring out different ways for your family to set that stage so that we feel ready for whatever that anxiety is resulting from. Looking at role and the implementation of strategies or techniques learned in therapy. So Patrick mentioned a little bit earlier, we are with kids for a short period of time, about an hour every week, every other week. And what do? We do a lot, we learn techniques, we learn different strategies, but just like we are, let's say we're learning how to ride a bike, if I hear that information saying you sit, you grab the handles and you pedal, I know for sure, for a fact, I fell a bunch of times, right? So when we think about how do we practice, how do we get familiar, how do we say, that didn't really work, let me try this again. So making sure that we are practicing the different strategies or techniques while we are at home, even though we learned that at therapy, we're just learning it at home's how we practice and we implement it. A big piece I know all of us do through therapy is making sure parents feel like they're part of that treatment as well. So we're not necessarily sitting down with them through a session, but if I always talk about a kid, hey, should we let mom know what we learned today so that she can maybe encourage us or remind us how to do it, right? So that you feel like I know what I'm supposed to do while we're at home based on what we learned in therapy. There are a few different books that we wanted to list. So talking about what do you do when you worry too much, shrinking the worry monster, right? So there's all different kinds of books out there to for age appropriate levels as far as what do I do with worrying? What is worrying? Thinking about healthy versus unhealthy worries or good or bad worries. If I am going out in a storm, there's a worry that like what's going to happen in bad weather. But if I'm thinking, all right, I'm inside and it's storming really bad, there's not necessarily a healthy reason to start thinking about that. So looking at it a little bit differently. To kind of continue based on what we do with therapy as families at home, we wanted to touch base on what we do as therapists or the role of therapy for you and your families. So to keep in mind, we do not see kids because something is wrong, they need to be fixed, right? Thinking about therapy as a tool. How do I learn different techniques, strategies, even education? What do I need to know about anxiety or behavior or depression, anything like that? So again, finding ways that works for you and your families versus coming to see Lauren, we're going to fix all your problems, because that's not the setup for therapy. It's also utilized for a safe place to get very close to uncomfortable feelings or situations, right? I always talk with patients about sometimes things are uncomfortable. Sometimes I don't know who I can say this to. I'm nervous what mom or dad's going to say if I say this out loud. A big one lately has been, this bothered me, but I don't want to hurt someone's feelings, so I don't say anything. But it's causing anxiety, it's causing anger. So having that safe place to be able to talk about those things. And then we learn how to talk about talking. How we learn how to talk. So when we think of that, we have normal conversations, right? But there's things that we just don't know, how do I say it? We talk about I statements or I feel statements. So like I feel hurt when you tell someone about my emotional breakdown, right? Felt very private to me that I let you into that space when I was having a really hard time, but then I heard you talk about it with someone else, right? So it's not saying you did this and you're bad and you're angry. That's not what we're trying to teach our kids to communicate. It's like, how do I identify what I'm feeling and what impacted that feeling as well? So next we want to provide some resources. And so what do we do, right? So we got a lot of different information. We got some different strategies. We are not the be all know all. So wanting to make sure we provide some different resources as far as what can we do next. There are plenty of different apps out there. So I know we talked a little bit about devices, but we can utilize devices for connection and for coping strategies. So for different age ranges, there's some different applications that are useful. So there's Stop, Breathe, and Think, and that's through Sesame Street. So that's an interactive app to be able to promote calming strategies, especially for our young ones, that it's like, I have all these emotions, I don't know what to do. I'm yelling or I'm throwing something, right? So taking a minute to be able to interact with that device of saying, this is what I can do instead, and learning some of those coping strategies. What's Up Mental Health is a app to be able to learn different tools to manage depression. So depending on what we may be managing at home, that's a different app that it might be easier to do on my own in my own room versus coming to therapy and saying, okay, now I have to talk to someone about this. So again, just some different tools. There is a suicide safe app, and that is prevention strategies for suicidal ideation if those are ever present, or if there's ever any safety concerns within the homes. Of course, if there's any presenting safety concern, we want to make sure that we're contacting either psychiatric emergency services, calling 911, taking to an emergency room. But these are preventative strategies so that if we don't have those safety concerns worsen at any times. Calm is going to be a app for mindfulness. How do I relax my mind? How do I stay present in the moment? And then we have Headspace that is focuses on meditation and then sleep hygiene. A lot of people are saying, I'm tired, my body's so tired, but my mind just won't let me fall asleep. So different techniques to be able to relax, kind of turn down that volume on our worrying or racing thoughts, and then being able to actually get good sleep once we lay down. Next, we just want to touch about the utilization of support groups, right? So not feeling alone in this. We've talked about how to connect with whether it's family or friends, even just different peers, right? So 211 is a great resource to say, not just about mental health, but all different types of resources or assistance, but they also provide resource lists as far as different support groups. Looking at Ozone, so Ozone has specialty support groups to be able to connect different individuals facing certain barriers or challenges, and saying, okay, how do we utilize this support and be able to have that safe place to process through it with others that are going through similar experiences. We always recommend checking with schools. So some parents are very surprised to hear that they have a like a wellness support group at their school or at their child's school. Some of them have like emotional learning support groups as well. So see what your school district or your kid's school has in place. And then also NAMI, that's the National Association of Mental Illness. So that's not just for individuals that are experiencing mental health barriers or challenges, but also for family members. What do I do? How do I continue to support my child? How do I feel connected as well, that I'm not just going through this alone as well?
And then, of course, a lot of what is available for communities really depends on where you're located geographically, and many things are determined based upon county. Certainly, like if you're in Oakland County or Washtenaw County and seeking emergency services for a young person, whether that's emergency counseling, shelters, whatever it is, Common Ground and Ozone House will provide those things. In any county you're in, there's going to be a community mental health authority, whether that's Wayne County Community Mental Health Authority, Washtenaw Community Mental Health, and any of those numbers are places that either have crisis services or emergency services for folks that may qualify for Medicaid or have very specific mental health concerns. Within Washtenaw County, Ypsilanti, there's Corner Health that provides mental health resources and care and counseling for young people. U of M Center for Children and Family has therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists that work with families on diagnostic tools and ongoing therapeutic guidance. New Oakland Family Centers has different kinds of partial or day programs, and the Guidance Center also provides some services for young people in different areas. Again, a lot of this has to do with where you're located geographically, and 211, the United Way information number, is actually one of the best resources to be able to figure out what is located geographically close to where you are. And then finally, if we're talking about finding a therapist, both of us can talk a lot about different places that do the kind of work that we do. Call your insurance card, because there's a lot of places that you can call, but it's a very frustrating process to call place by place by place and see if they take your insurance. going to the source is going to get you the places you need. Psychology Today is a website that has a lot of different resources and postings, profiles for the different people that do this kinds of things that we do. And then there is us. There's myself, Patrick, Lauren, and then Leah Diebel as well, that works out of the Cherry Hill office for IHA. So at this moment, presentation is concluded. Would begin fielding questions. My Zoom crashed halfway through, and I do not have any of those other questions. So Lauren, I do not know if you have access to some of the other ones still from before my app crashed.
Yes, I do. Do you have any right now? I'm going to switch our slides. So I don't know if I want to start and I can pull
I
those
can
up.
read one of the questions.
Okay, thank you.
Anxiety can produce stomach aches. How do we tell these aches from possible symptoms of COVID?
This is where I will happily field this question. First up, say that we are not doctors as a part of it. So ultimately, it's going to be calling primary care doctor and physician, and they will take the guidance on that. I know at IHA, there are triage nurses that can check with some of those different kinds of symptoms. I am not a doctor if we're talking about COVID. We're also talking about a myriad of other things that can come as a part of it, between the headaches, the loss of sense of smell, fevers, different kinds of things that come out of it. If a young person is solely complaining about stomach aches and it's something that happens very regularly as a part of it, there are a lot of families that go and get the COVID testing as a part of it to rule that out. We cannot definitively say if a stomach ache is anxiety or COVID. It would be a primary care doctor that is going to ultimately make the testing and the determination to figure that out. I realize is a non-answer, so I'm sorry about that. But I would say if you see a stomach ache consistently and around the same time, that's going to be a different scenario. But if a young person is like, I always have a stomach ache around lunch at school, that may be indicative of anxiety. I always have a stomach ache before I go to school. That may be indicative of anxiety. If there's this person that I see, suddenly I'm complaining of stomach aches. If you notice patterns to it, that may be something that tells you something different.
And the question is, how can I help my student readjust to school and navigating the change from elementary to middle school? The transition appears to be wait, what's this word? Seems to be worse because of the pandemic.
Okay. Yeah.
Do you want to go?
Okay. Well, I'll talk a little bit. We can talk a little bit.
Okay.
I think, if we're talking about difficult transitions, I think a lot of it will depend on if this is an academic concern, like a concern about now I'm around teachers and I'm around students and I'm still doing work, or if there's a big social concern that's a part of it, that like I'm around a lot of people that I don't really know because I was behind a computer screen that entire time. And certainly if I'm in middle school, that's an entirely new place, entirely new people, entirely new everything. I think if I'm talking with families about how to get used to that adjustment, a lot of that talk is one, it will take time. So there has to be some tolerance that, an adjustment takes a period of time to be able to get used to those things. And then thinking about connection, that are there clubs, extracurriculars that this young person can get involved as a part of it. If they feel they have allies within that school, and if they feel that they have friends as a part of it, that makes it an experience that can be a lot better and bring a lot more joy. Social connection is what we thrive on. Social connection is what we need. Are there connections like that at school? And I can't speak to any one particular young person's scenario. But building that in can, at least if socialization is the concern, can be something that alleviates that. And I don't know, Lauren, if there are more things you want to add.
No, I think you covered a lot of it, but I think it's really identifying like what is it about that adjustment to school. So I've been seeing a lot of 7th graders coming in saying, yeah, I was in 6th grade at a new school, but I was at home for the whole time, right? So that changed that from being in elementary school and being kind of the 5th graders, right? And then coming in and saying, now I'm in a new school. It's not just the people that I'm used to, it's multiple schools coming in together, depending on the location. And so really seeing, like Patrick said, is it the socialization? Is it so many people? Is it the expectations of schools? So I've had parents say, the fact that they're switching classes throughout or switching teachers and settings throughout the whole day, which, yeah, they did that online, but it's not the same environment. I just switched kind of Zooms rather than physically going to a locker and switching books and going. So I think really just exploring what is it that's difficult, kind of having those conversations about are you feeling comfortable with friends? Is it difficult kind of finding your classes, right? So trying to identify really where some of those difficulties are being displayed, or kind of the root cause of them as well.
Another question is, how do you address device addiction?
I think a lot of this is going to depend upon the severity that a person is seeing. Talk with a lot of parents that are, frustrated. Like, my kid just seems like they're on their phone all the time. They don't really talk to me. I don't think it's frustrating, and it's not unusual. And a lot of that can be, sort of what need is that device filling? Is it that, this young person has connections in there with people that are in their life? Okay, so how can a parent facilitate those different kinds of connections in other settings? Is it about, that a lot of their friends are online? This is how they connect with their friends online. Okay, so how can we support building friendships in person? How can we do that as a part of it? What need is it fulfilling? If we're talking about something that rises to like a pathological level, where we're talking about like a diagnosable addiction or things that are really severe as a part of it, then we're talking about treatment. And we're talking about interventions that can involve therapists and work with families to establish, some different strategies, intervention moments, different limits to put on at home. Some families, depending on the phone plan that people have, they have like limits of and certain apps where the phone shuts off at a certain time to discourage, time usage out of that. Some folks have different blocks on the kinds of apps that folks would use, or different timers of when they can use it. Some folks find a lot of success in that. Some folks find that an enormous source of stress. I can't make a guarantee about this particular young person, but those are some different things that parents have accessed that they have found some success in. I don't know, Lauren, if you'd like to add anything.
No, again, just really that, I know families have set like internet access, right? So like you said, timers or like sleep modes for phones, trying to limit that time being able to spend on devices. But I think a big piece is like, what are we needing for that? Is it because I feel like I'm bored without it and I just need to play a game and I just need to kind of occupy my time? Or is it because I feel like that's my best way of connecting with people? Because we don't want to take away a support without replacing it with something else. So like Patrick mentioned, if we're decreasing the amount of time of playing online with friends, but in the flip side, we have to make sure that we're having that connection or that need met elsewhere, whether that's spending time with friends, whether that's spending time with family, things like that.
Another question, I believe this was entered when you were giving your portion of the presentation, Patrick, was what ages are you seeing all of these behaviors in?
Varies depending on the behavior. I think I'm seeing anywhere between 4 and 10, 11. If we're talking about like shoving, fighting, having disruptive behaviors in the classroom, running out of a classroom as a part of it. I would say 10, 11 is kind of on the outward end of what we would expect to see. But 4, 5, 6, 7, up to 8 years old, those are things that I end up talking with a lot of different families about. If we're talking about, teenage behaviors and, outbursts at home, screaming matches, I'm talking anywhere between 10 up through 18 as a part of it. It really depends on what particular thing we're seeing. I just know across 4th through a person graduates high school, we're talking with people about anger and angry, and it being a thing that's disruptive both in classrooms and at home.
Thank you. Another question, and we kind of touched on this, but my daughter gets worried and stressed because of some of the misinformation that she receives at school. How can I help her to reduce the stress generated during school?
So I think in one of, when we talked about approaches towards anxiety, right? Again, like feeding a worry versus arguing with it. And so we can't control every exposure that kids have, right? Whether that's at school, whether that's online, whether that's on the bus. And so creating that type of just comfort level to be able to communicate, having, whether it's a parent or whether that's another safe adult, to have those conversations. I heard this at school today. What does that mean? Or I heard this. Is it true? Should I be worrying about this? Right. So just having, again, that connection to be able to communicate about it, and then arguing against it. And I think a little bit of like, what does that stress management or what does that anxiety look like at school? So are we avoiding going to school because we're having that worrying thought because the kid I sit next to said something that doesn't make me feel safe there, right? So identifying what is it that's kind of causing that stress, specifically, not just I'm hearing mixed information or misinformation, but where is that worrying thought, or what are those racing thoughts kind of circulating about? Patrick, would you add anything to that?
I think it's funny that today I was talking with a 9-year-old around a lot of worries about any kind of vaccinations, because these are a lot of different things at school. And he's 9 years old, and that means that different kids in his school are getting vaccinated. Some kids are not getting vaccinated as a part of it with the transition for the new 5 to 11 age range. And he's had a lot of concerns about what people are saying to him, what his parents are saying to him, what his relatives are saying to him. And I think what we end up talking about is a lot of reassurance around, what are vetting processes for these kinds of vaccines? What are the messages that are coming from families? How is the family either arguing with or feeding that kind of thing? Where are the trusted sources that he's getting messages from? So it's a lot of conversations with a young person around how do you know what a trusted source is? How do you know what a trustworthy person is? How do you verify something as a part of it? Not as a countering and saying there are absolute truths that you need to look at as a part of this, and every family gets some say in whether or not the young person gets vaccinated. But sort of working with that young person to say, okay, so, if somebody is telling this to you, how do you verify if it's true or not? What are steps that we can take to look at this piece of information together to analyze, exactly where it's coming from, how it's coming from somebody, and if it's something that should cause us that level of concern. I see somebody asking about the access to slides, and I believe the answer before was yes.
Yes, slides and the presentation is recorded, and that will be shared with everyone that's registered. One more question is, if you think your child would benefit from having a life coach, how do you go about finding one?
I'll be honest, I have less familiarity with the field and world of life coaching as a part of it. So I would not claim to be a person that could speak to that with some level of expertise, and I'm sorry for that.
I think I'd have to agree. I'm not too familiar with what that procedure would be to connect with the life coach. But I think just starting off, sometimes schools have different, whether that's a life coach, whether that's a mentoring program, even seeing what those different services could look like, whether that's through school, even contacting, I think 211, which is United Way, is really helpful of connecting different resources as well. So apologize that we don't have too much information on that aspect, but hopefully that's a kind of a good start for you.
Patrick and Lauren, I just entered a question into the chat feature that was a little longer. Okay. If you want to review that and then answer that question.
Okay.
And I think that will be our last question for the night. It looks like that's the last one that's been submitted. So.
Okay. Jump and read in a bit now. So relaxation before bed, comes out, wakes up at 2 to 4 a.m., attempt to relax to fall asleep, doesn't always work. This is where I encourage families to try out and run experiments. There are some young people that, if we're talking about the Calm Space app, there are a lot of different relaxation strategies that somebody can access and use as a part of it. There are some young people that I talk with that deeply respond to a guided imagery exercise, that just doing that before bed, remembering a pleasant experience in their life, remembering something wonderful that happened and the things that they saw, heard, smelled, tasted, and touched as a part of it. They find that cools them down enough to sleep through the night. Some young people, I find particularly young boys, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, really respond to progressive muscle relaxation, the tensing up and the releasing as a part of everything, and navigating that through different body parts. There are really kid-friendly YouTube videos you can find out as a part of it to guide young people through that process. There are some people that really respond to that. There are some people that really respond to meditations. I think if you are working with your young person on how to relax and prepare for these kinds of things, framing it as an experiment that doesn't have expectations tied to it may help them feel like, oh, there's no pressure related to making this work. Like I suddenly have to fix this thing. I suddenly have to make it better for my parents, because there can be a pressure as a part of it. But trying out different things as a part of it, because I can't promise that any one thing is going to work for a child. Every child is different. All the things that somebody could access as a part of it could be beneficial. So Calm can be one of them, guided imagery, progressive muscle relaxation, meditative exercises. There's a lot of things somebody can try as a part of it.
I think one piece that I'd add to that, so definitely supporting all of that, but if we're having some of that anxiety or those worrying thoughts whether that's before bed, waking up and starting to think about those as well. Some different strategies depending, kind of even with that age as well, is having a worrying time, right? Setting a time to be able to say, this is what I'm worrying about, this is what's been going on. And then again, what do we do with those worries? Are we feeding them? Are we arguing against them? So even saying, if we notice throughout the day, saying like, I'm having a lot of worrying, whether that's right before bed, so we feel like we handle it. Some parents feel like that's really helpful. Sometimes they're like, nope, we got to do it in the beginning of the mornings or the first thing in the morning so that we aren't having a lot of those thoughts just racing in our mind as well. So being able to address it, but not letting it consume whether it's our sleep or the rest of our day. So sometimes that's helpful to agree upon a time saying, yep, we're going to sit down, we're going to have this conversation of we're setting our worrying time for us or our worrying break to be able to address some of those things that we're thinking about.
Perfect. Thank you, Patrick and Lauren. And again, the presentation will be shared along with a recording for everyone that was registered for this event. So thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you all for sticking around. Have a wonderful
Thanks
day.
for joining us tonight. Have a great night.